On behalf of Ours That I Am Canada and Intricity, welcome to Reimagine, an opportunity to explore life's new questions. As a means of introduction, my name is Alana Walker Carpenter, and I will be your host today. Whether you have a little faith, a lot of faith, or no faith at all, we hope that this will be a safe landing ground for us to reimagine 2021. For those of you who are engaged on social media, our hashtag is Reimagine 2020. That's Reimagine 2020. And for those who would like to engage in our live Q&A, can simply click the right-hand side of your screen, and those questions will come directly to us. It is my pleasure to introduce to you, firstly, Andy Moore, director and co-founder of Festival of Thought. Welcome, Andy. Andy has previously worked as an advisor in some of the private equity firms in the UK. He sits on a board of trustees for a strategic Christian organization, and he is a chartered accountant in both England and Wales. He is a keen sportsman and played rugby to a competitive level and lives in the UK with his new wife. Welcome again. And Darren Haneen. Darren is a designer, a game developer, a teacher, and photographer. He's worked in startups, corporations, and not-for-profits. Presently, he is the director of UX for retail for Shopify, the third largest retailer next to Amazon and eBay, which serves 1 million merchants. He lives in Toronto together with his wife and 2 young children. Welcome, Darren. So Andy, I'm going to start with you. It has been a joy to get to know you over the last 8+ weeks. You bookended our series, and Andy, it was you who felt that this series should be called Reimagine. And so Andy, why Reimagine as a series title?
Oh, thank you, Alana. And hey to everyone on the call. It's really lovely to be back with you. I hope the day's going well so far. When I cast my mind back to the conversations we were having earlier in the summertime about the dreams of pulling together a series just like this one, I guess the conversation revolved around trying to design some sort of value proposition which made an address to some of the huge questions that we were facing and continue to face as a culture, as a world. Obviously, I suppose, precipitated by everything which COVID-19 has resulted in, but not just that, some of the other huge movements and trends that we've observed, and these ongoing debates that we're now having, conversations about the economy and trade-offs with healthcare, trade-offs between our freedoms and our civic duties, lockdowns and vaccines and justice and equality, reverberations from all the events around George Floyd, and the discovery of things in our culture to do with injustice that no longer can be denied. So a volume and an intensity of question really that I don't think I've experienced before. They've all come together at this one time. They seem to penetrate to levels and asking ourselves at a really kind of deep place who we are and what we think this world is really all about. And the challenge that they bring to the stories that we thought our lives were part of. And moving towards that idea of reimagine, one of the most kind of prominent images I had in my mind was having built a few sandcastles on the shore of the sea, and how those sandcastles look kind of cool and good. But then the sea, one of those waves just sweeps in and takes it all down. And you're left looking at it and you think to yourself, well, what do we do now? Should we rebuild the sandcastle? Should we be building on the beach at all? Is sand the right material? We always thought a castle was the structure to aim for. All of these questions, I think, are on the table in terms of the lives that we want to lead as individuals and the types of society that we want to create and curate for ourselves together. And so those topics that we've surveyed in this series, success, leadership, justice, all of these things on the table, and saying, well, we had a sandcastle before. We kind of thought it used to be like this, and maybe it is like this, but maybe it's not like this. Maybe it's more like that. And so we wanted to curate a set of conversations and dialogues just to do that together, and obviously to bring in some perspectives and insight from the Christian worldview. This unique thing that the Christian worldview seems to suggest, that it's possible to understand these great trends in our world and kind of in an out there sense, but it's also possible to have answers that make sense to the heart. And this relationship with God that Christianity talks about really being something that can make a profound difference in our lives. So it was pulling all of those bits together that seemed to fit nicely under a title of Reimagine.
Thank you, Andy. You have brought me back to my childhood of building sandcastles and then seeing them crumble and then reimagining what they can look like. You said something so poignant too, Andy, asking who we are and what this world is all about. And I think that's what we've done the last 8 weeks and really what we've done since mid-March. Darren, this next question is for you. Both you and Andy and myself, for that matter, are all in lockdown, COVID-19 lockdown. And this lockdown has impacted everybody across the board, but it has really impacted small business. Your organization, Shopify, exists so anyone, anywhere can start, run, or grow a business. In fact, your organization, Darren, has stated, we won't wait for the future. We'll build it together. For those who don't know, maybe Darren, describe what Shopify is and how you have helped small business, new and existing clients, navigate through the pandemic thus far.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks again for inviting me to this conversation. I think you described what Shopify is well, and I'll go into a bit more detail. What began as a platform to help you sell your products online and set up an online store has evolved to become a place where you can build your business. And so we help you sell online. We help you sell in Facebook and Pinterest and Instagram and all the places where your buyers are. We help you with your marketing. We help you set up a retail location. We help you understand the data and kind of analytics around your business and manage your staff. And so it really is aiming to be the platform for entrepreneurship. And that's our kind of vision and mission. And kind of as Andy described, this year threw a wave at our sandcastle and kind of took our plans by surprise. And specifically my team, which focuses on helping brick and mortar businesses, in March and April, we saw vast numbers of them shutting their doors. I think over 80% were closed in some capacity, either by regulation or by their own decision given the pandemic, which was quite discouraging for them, obviously, and kind of threw us for a loop. But we just had to quickly get to work, and we felt the responsibility that we had to help them succeed. And so initially we aimed at helping them set up online stores and move their customers and their sales to online where they could still sell. And then it was about building features quickly that enabled them to sell safely. And so curbside pickup and buy online and pick it up in the store, and local delivery options were all things that we moved quickly on. And by June, we saw those same merchants make up about 94% of that lost revenue. So it was a difficult time for us, but I think it was an opportunity for us to materially help. And that's, I think, what Shopify is trying to do, is really just meet merchants where they are and understand the realities that their businesses are facing.
Thank you, Darren. That's amazing what was made up in that time. And last year you had 61 billion in revenues in 2019. I can only imagine what it will be in 2020. One of the things that I love that you said is just that responsibility that you bear as an organization. And I think as leaders, we need to bear that same responsibility. In keeping with leadership, Andy, as we come to the end of the fourth quarter and look ahead, not just to the first quarter of 2021, but the second, third, and fourth, what will leadership require within organizations, within homes, and within communities?
Wow. What a great question. I mean, in some ways, Alana, your guess is as good as mine. Part of the reality that we're stepping into is one characterized by just sheer uncertainty. And the point about this reimagination that we're talking about is to be open to the possibility that we don't actually have the concepts in our mind to deal with everything that it will take to lead successfully through the future. But I do think we are able to identify some of the contours on the landscape. And as well as the question of leadership, one other thing I just want to throw out there is, for those of us that are leaders, and there are many of us on this call who are leaders and have those kinds of responsibilities, we do also have the question of what it means to be led. Leaders are also at times led themselves. And I think that's an equally important question to be considering. What are the things that we choose to follow? What are the values that we have and espouse and go after? So I'd like to just kind of consider both of those things side by side. But from an organizational perspective, some of the real pragmatic questions are to do with this new normal that we've stumbled across in this kind of bumbled response to COVID-19. Everyone working from home, everyone going on Zoom, Zoom's share price going through the roof. But some of the other sides of that and the reality of what it means to actually be working from home and some of the blurred lines between work and life, and how when we used to commute and have that time to listen to an audiobook on the train, maybe we just choose to work a little bit more, and some of the challenges to our lives and the team dynamics and the effectiveness of being able to do that on digital platforms. Organizational leaders are going to have to deal with the sheer anxiety, I think, that exists around the economy in general and the vulnerability that so many people around the status of their employment. I would add questions of resilience and supply chains and designing things in a way that mitigate against some of the risks of the global logistics chains that we used to rely on, but which seem not to be something we can assume being in place in the future. Societal leadership is going to be taking us successfully through some of these really important dialogues. I've mentioned a few of them: economics versus health, wealth distribution, how to deal with these undeniable inequalities that only seem to be exasperated by some of our approach to monetary policy. Just today, I think the UK Chancellor has reimagined his definition of inflation, which is probably the inevitable result of some of this quantitative easing. But what I think is the common denominator for all leaders to consider is just how to deal with this fragility, which has been put in front of us: organizational fragility, societal fragility, and individual fragility. And it comes back around to the question of how we ourselves want to be led out of this. Because in these times of crisis, we are open and desirous to hear stories of hope preached from leaders who espouse utopia of this or that description according to this or that ideology. And so the choice of who we make to follow is going to be really important. And I find that the Bible actually is hugely helpful when it comes to these questions. It seems to be realistic about human fragility, but also hopeful in a really wholesome way. And Jesus actually being a figure that holds together so many of these things that we've stumbled across, in terms of wanting to look out for the weak, stand up to corrupt authorities. And, whether he's not running for president, but he might be worth considering in terms of a source of the values that we'll make our choices to do with leadership on.
Thank you, Andy. And recently I heard someone talking about how we need to think of the least of these as small business. One of the things that I picked up from you, Andy, was just not just us as leaders focusing on how to lead, but how to follow, and how to follow well. An important lesson for us all. Darren, this next question is for you. Shopify was started with 5 guys in a coffee shop. I can't help to think about how many businesses are actually started in a coffee shop. From those 5 guys, you've grown to 5,000 staff globally. I'm wondering what sort of leadership insights Toby, your founder, and others within the team have learned, and what you might be able to share with us today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can kind of wrap it up in 3 observations I've made. The first, as you described, is, Shopify, like many organizations, is made of people, and we've been successful because of the people who we employ. And through this year, really facing unprecedented crisis, we've really focused on the people and making sure that everyone feels safe, comfortable, they understand expectations, they are given space and time to do what they need for their families and their health and their mental health. And so really putting people first has been a huge guideline for us this year. And it's forced us to reevaluate our plans and our timelines and thinking. But I think, believe strongly that these people are the people who are going to carry us forward as a business. And it's to our detriment if we don't honor that and give people space. The second is just around the theme of vulnerability. I think it's easy as a leader to fall into a trap where you always want to have this kind of confident face, and you're unwilling to admit your fears or your own anxieties or your own the uncertainties that you may face. And I found it really helpful this year to be honest with my team and just say, look, I don't know either, and I'm a bit worried also, and I'm having a hard time too, and I'm finding it difficult to balance my work and life. And you see the relief on people's faces instantly when they understand that, okay, I'm not alone here. This person who I am following and who is leading us is feeling what I'm feeling. he understands what I'm going through. And it can be difficult to be vulnerable, no doubt, but I find it a very valuable tool. And it really helps build trust with your team and the people you work with. And the last, kind of back to the sandcastle illustration, is, as great as plans are, it's also important to know when they need to be thrown out. And, we're always anticipating a future that's evolving in front of us as a business, but this year has just thrown wrenches in our plans unlike any other. And it was Toby who said to us at some point that, we just need to put the plans in the garbage, and we need to consider everything anew, and we need to let go of commitments and let go of plans that we had before COVID-19, and really look at what do our merchants need today? What are the problems they now have? What are the things that they're anxious about and that they're concerned about? And how do we reprioritize our efforts towards those goals?
Thank you, Darren. So putting people first, being raw, honest, and vulnerable, and just having that flexibility and adaptability, just that big, giant pivot. Andy, the next question is for you. What are some of the main things that you've learned about your own sense of identity and priorities, and how does that tie in with some of the bigger picture ideas that we've been discussing?
Wow. Well, just like everybody else, I've had plenty of time to think in lockdown, and it occurred to me, I had this really strange memory that came along of a kids' TV program that I watched when I was a kid. In the year 2000, turning of the millennium, they buried a little time capsule containing little artifacts relating to their childhood and a letter to their future selves, with the idea that in the year 2020, they would dig it up and read those letters and see what had happened. And I just would love to know what the readers of those letters are thinking in the year that has absolutely not gone to script. I didn't write myself a letter. Somehow I didn't really get around to it, or maybe I thought it was a bit nerdy. But nonetheless, this has been a year like everyone else. I have been dealing with the disillusionment of lots of projects and things that I've worked really hard on just crumbling down around me at work, and fears to do with my family and disruption to the sale of my father's business, for example. So just like everyone else, putting it on the table, asking those hard questions of what's most important when everything seems to be taken away like this. And one or two of the key things that have stood out to me are just to do with that sense of wanting basically to prioritize whatever can be said in terms of my eulogy or at the end of my life versus what can be said on my CV. I think if push comes to shove, I really want to choose family, relationships, love, and prioritizing those things over, to be honest, some of the strivings that maybe would have described me more accurately pre-COVID. I really want to have that eulogy prioritized over my CV. And the sense of affirmation of worth when rest is forced upon me. Being a striver, a hard worker, somebody full of determination like people on this call. But when all that's taken away and you're actually just left to contemplate, well, yeah, taking a deep breath here, and that ancient kind of Hebrew idea of Sabbath and rest, and of a humble admission that I'm not the most important thing of the world doesn't depend on me, and there's a real kind of life that springs from that kind of realization. So those are two things that have helped me deal with this and to understand who I'm becoming, as well as wherever my life might be going.
Thank you, Andy. I love that eulogy versus CV. In fact, I was being coached by someone, and they actually suggested that I color code my calendar and use my favorite color for what is most important for me to do. And that has been really helpful. It's pink, for those of you who want to know. And then that work versus rest. And we tend to esteem what people do rather than how they be, and how important it is that we as leaders are even esteeming the right things. In fact, I've often felt that we should have on our performance development reviews just that checkbox of people resting, of people taking vacation, of people simply being quiet. Thank you, Andy. Darren, this next question is for you. You have created your organization essentially as a one-stop shop. How can organizations diversify in order to not be obsolete during this pandemic?
It's a good question. And I also excessively color code my calendar. I find it really helpful to see at a glance, where my time is being spent. So I endorse that tip. For us, it's really helped to be a mission-led organization. And so in 15 years of business, we've always focused on making commerce better for everyone. And that's been the goal, and that's been the vision and our mission and what we strive to do as a business. And it's helped us through quite a lot of change in the industry maintain direction and maintain focus on what we are trying to accomplish. And that really came to light this year as our plans were thrown out the window and we had to reevaluate where we were going to spend our time and our energy. And this guiding North Star of making commerce better for everyone helped us with focus. The other thing that's been really valuable for us is to be an organization that's focused on problems, not solutions. And so you won't often hear Shopify described as the best tool to set up an online store because we see that as a solution. We describe ourselves as the best platform to build your business because we know that's a challenging thing and we want to help you do that. And so this year, merchants and our customers are faced with all sorts of problems that they didn't have before. And it was instinct for us to initially reach out, talk to them, and deeply understand what are the problems you now face. If you run a brick and mortar store and that store is closed, what are you going to do? You have staff on pay, you have rent to pay, you have inventory in these locations. How can we help you with this new problem? And we've built this muscle of being problem focused and merchant obsessed, and that's really helped us reevaluate. And so I think for most organizations, that flexibility can come by focusing on the problems that you're trying to solve and the questions people have that you're trying to help answer versus being too focused on the solution that you think will be applicable to the problem.
I love that, Darren. And so often we go into a situation with all of these preconceived notions of what we think. And really what we need to do is listen slowly, to listen slowly. Andy, we've had a question come in from one of our viewers today. This is from Miriam. What kind of personal qualities and commitments will it take to reimagine 2021? I hear a lot about prioritizing and carefully selecting our top priorities. Once we do that, what's the next best step?
Wow, thank you for that question, Miriam. It's a great one. I've just taken a note to myself to color code my calendar, by the way. Thanks for that tip, guys. Yeah, I mean, it is one thing to say, get your priorities in line. And then, well, people are like, okay, so how do we make a good distinction between these things? What is the correct order to go? One of the most helpful ideas that I've come across is, well, firstly, an observation that this prioritization is to some extent unavoidable. So whether we are in control of our priorities and our priorities are an intentional thing, or whether or not they're a subconscious thing going on, it is going on one way or another. We as humans want to do this thing where we chase after thing X so that thing Y results, and that when we have thing Y, thing Z is the thing that comes after that. And we get all the way up to the thing which explicitly or implicitly we take to be the most important. And so when it comes to a personal quality, I think there's a huge amount of kind of reflectiveness that we need to inculcate when we are people who run from pillar to post, driven actually by the tyranny of the urgent, with all of our different deadlines and so on. It can be difficult actually just to have that time to reflect and to get those things in the right order. A perspective that I find super, super helpful is to set aside the notion of these things being in conflict. So often we create dichotomies in our mind that may not necessarily be true dichotomies, and to find ways of having one thing serve another in a life-giving, complementary way. And there are all sorts of books and different things that we can learn about our habits to continue that spirit of diligence. But there is a perspective that I do pick up from what Jesus says at the Sermon on the Mount about that desirability of putting first our relationship with him and trusting that when that's in place, the rest of the things make sense in hierarchy under that. So perhaps that invites us to take what you might call an eternal perspective on these things, and to say that with the view of whether it's our eulogy that we want to be in the right condition in the future, or what we take to be the direction of travel of the universe as a whole, to somehow allow that perspective to generate that perspective to foster our worldview and to allow that to infiltrate the rest of what we think and feel and do. So often we do get pulled around with the ability to generate kind of short-sighted results, which mean that we miss out on something that might have been even better in the long term. So maybe one third quality to try and inculcate would be not settling for less, but really believing that there are good things waiting for us in this world. And as a Christian, I would say the best thing to be had is that life-giving relationship with God.
Thank you, Andy. And if we're all to be really honest, there's so many competing interests, not just good versus bad, but good versus good. But I really resonate that it's what we put first. It's what we put first. Darren, the next question is for you. I am really curious about how this pandemic has affected your generation.
Yeah, I mean, it's something my friends and I have spoken about a fair bit. And, it's been an evolving conversation this year as we've gone from, a few weeks to a few months to, where we are now. I think a few themes have emerged for us. One is, despite, having a clear separation for many of us between work and life or home life prior, just by physical kind of design, and we would be in an office and we'd be at home. I think a lot of us are giving more thought to what that balance looks like now because it's all the same place. And so you can't just default to, well, when I'm home, I'm at home, and when I'm at work, I'm at work. Because, even prior, when I'm at home, my phone would be going off and I'd be tempted to check email and respond once the kids are in bed. And now I think we all have to be a lot more intentional about what that boundary looks like and what that separation and balance looks like. And so I think for a lot of us, it's forced and encouraged us to think outside that box. And so I have, friends at work who are taking midday walks or working out at lunch or spending time with their kids in the morning and working a little bit later, and really designing their life around what's best for them and their families and their needs. And I think the flexibility that working from home has afforded is, really empowering us to do that. And the other is just around, I think, self-care. I think we've all, experienced just the routine and kind of Monday to Friday, and you go to work and this is what life looks like. And you fall into this habit, and things can kind of creep up on you. Whereas this year, everything is just exaggerated. Everything is at extremes. And we're dealing, month over month with very difficult topics, as Andy described, which we're discussing, and we're dealing with difficult situations. And it's become more important than ever to understand and recognize that, we need to care for ourselves as well. And we need to be patient with ourselves and forgive ourselves and not expect maybe what we would have expected of ourselves in past years. And that's been a refreshing conversation to have as well. And I think it's really enabled a lot of us to make it through this year and just, find a new way of setting expectations for ourselves and, not losing sight of the goal and not being ambitious and driven, but also just making sure there's downtime and time to take care of ourselves as well.
Thank you, Darren. So really setting and establishing new rhythms and really not being afraid to fail. If something doesn't work, try something different. And that whole element of self-care, how easy it is for us to extend grace and encourage others to have that self-care, but for us to own it and to do it ourselves, put on our own oxygen masks. Indeed, this next question is for you. We have seen an enormous amount of suffering in our world, both physical loss and symbolic loss. When we have spoken about this, all in this together, one of the unspoken things really has been that grief element. How do we continue our journey of suffering together? And where can we get that sense of comfort? And I'll go one step further, joy from?
Wow. One of the things which is most sort of broken about our human experience, but also the thing which helps us to keep moving and to keep putting one foot in front of the other, is the ability to always have that future orientation and to want to strive for better things ahead. And there'll be a group of people on this call for whom just can't wait to get out of the blocks and the future's very bright. But there'll be other people on this call who are thinking to themselves, I am really just in a huge place of grief and trauma at everything that I've experienced. And so it's poignant, Alana, that your question actually just picks up that issue of doing this together. And I think the extent of grace that's going to be needed for our culture just to move forward as one people and understanding all of the things that we've been through. For those that have been sick, lost someone, lost their business, these are real, true traumas that actually we haven't been able to grieve properly at all. You know, things are moving at such a pace. I heard the story on the news here in the UK yesterday that there was a woman who had to watch her father die from the outside of a window of a care home, and she's not been able to grieve in the proper way. Funerals and so forth have not been able to be done in the customary manner. There is a real time capsule of grief being buried, and it might come up in another 20 years. And I think it serves us well to be super aware of that when we speak to people around us. And when it comes to this question of suffering, you know, this is the question where we need the most satisfying answer. It has to make sense intellectually. We actually have to be able to put these things together in our minds and believe these convictions and things that we tell ourselves about what just happened and why. But it also has to be an answer that we can live by and which makes sense of this at the level of our own hearts. For me, that is one of the biggest problems when we take God out of the picture and we say that he's not there, he hasn't shown any care for the world, and we want to give ourselves in kind of an atheistic viewpoint on things. According to that, viruses just mutate, and that's the way it is, and sometimes it takes out thousands of people, and we've got to get on with it. That doesn't seem to satisfy at any level. We're actually looking for an answer that will take us forward together, that speaks to the reality of this pain, which doesn't downplay it in any sense whatsoever, but what does give us a credible hope that it's not the end of the story, that none of this pain, whether it's for us as a culture or for any person in their individual life, that is not the end of the story. It won't be in vain, that one day actually tears might be wiped away from our eyes. And I'm just reminded as I'm speaking of what happened to Mary Magdalene when she went along to the tomb of Jesus after his crucifixion in John chapter 20. She's actually gone along at the first opportunity to express her grief in the way that was customary to her culture, but she discovers that Jesus's body isn't there anymore. And so she is grief upon grief. She isn't able to express any of this trauma that she's feeling. She turns around, she sees this gardener and says, "What have you done with Jesus's body?" And in that moment, she's expressing that her question expected too little. And when, in fact, if she expected even more of God, she would have understood that that wasn't the gardener, that was actually Jesus right there in the very moment that her grief was at its most poignant, and that he was willing to embrace her and to take her forward from there. And so in these dark days of suffering, in lockdown, in isolation, when we feel that there's no one else around, as well as these questions of what are we going to do as a group and as a culture, I would say that the person of Christ is uniquely positioned to offer us comfort in all of these things, that his cross is evidence of the seriousness of his identification with our human suffering, of wanting to come and stand alongside us. But that when we turn around and ask, where is he in our grief, we do find that he's right there. And that is a step that actually it might be worth taking if you've never tried that before.
And it's only natural to question and to want to know where he is. And some people have said, I feel like God has quarantined himself. And if you are feeling like that, you're not alone. I think one of the most profound things we can give each other during this time is the gift of friendship, the comfort of knowing that somebody is with you in the silence of the night and in the pause of the day, or to simply tell somebody, I'm waiting with you. Darren, this next question is for you. You and I have spoken about how people just keep deferring things, deferring the small things, the big things, and everything in between. What suggestions would you provide to others as we move into the new year?
Yeah, I mean, we were speaking about this earlier and kind of recognizing that early on when, the timeline was a bit less certain and, it was easier to say, well, let's, we'll cancel this birthday party or we'll do this next month when we can do this in person. And that's obviously not played out as we expected. And I've just seen, many folks, including myself, take this attitude of, okay, well, when things are back to normal, we'll do this then. But what I've also started to hear more and more of is this idea of the new normal, and everyone asking me, how are you adjusting to the new normal? And it was a really good reminder that, life can't stop. And it really came to light for my wife and I, in September as we celebrated our 10th anniversary. And, for a couple of years now, we've been planning to go somewhere warm and sit on a beach and take a break from our kids and celebrate that way. And, while we still plan on doing that in the future when we're able to, it was really important for us to also celebrate this year. And so we found other ways to celebrate, within our home, and we ended up getting to the cottage for a night, and just recognizing that we can't wait to celebrate, and we can't wait to enjoy the parts of our lives that we've been looking forward to. And so whether it's our kids' birthday parties or anniversaries or things like that, it's been really important for us to find ways to continue on. And for the time being, this is normal. This is how life has been for, the last 8-9 months, and it's likely going to be the case for the next few months. And so while we're hopeful for a return to physical community and all the, experiences that we enjoyed in the past, I think we just need to also find ways to, differently just celebrate today as well.
I love that, Darren. So we need to reimagine our grief and our suffering in some ways, as Andy just spoken, but just reimagine how we celebrate, how we pause there as well. Andy, this next question is for you. Reflecting on your own unique truths, what is the best lens through which to view the future? Reflecting on your own unique truths.
Okay. Wow. So there are two basic ways that you can approach the question of the future. Let me give you an image maybe of what it's like to stand on the platform in a train station, and you watch one train come in from this direction, and you have a second train that comes in from this direction, and you're on the platform and you can board whichever one you want. But there is a lens which talks about the future. Let's pretend it's this train coming from this way. The origins of this train are with the ideas of Athens and a view of the world and the future as being only ever something that can be constructed out of what we currently see. So the arrangement of things in the world, the arrangement of our lives, the arrangement of atoms, if we change them a little bit, the passing of time, that is the only thing that by definition can characterize the future. And to me, that's a very dismal idea, because one of the things we know from physics is of this increasing entropy in the universe. One of the things we know from our experience of life is that things, at least at this moment in time, seem to be only going from bad to worse. And actually a reconfiguration of whatever we have at the moment might make a kind of splodge of a slightly different picture, but it ain't going to be any kind of masterpiece. But there's this idea, which doesn't come from Athens, it comes from Jerusalem, which is a future not of our construction, but a future which actually sits in the hands of God, and it's a future that he is bringing to us. And I think that the one thing that we need to look at, and this is actually the platform, is probably the historical evidence around the resurrection of Christ. And this would be the point at which these two ideas of the future seem to pass themselves on the track. Now, that is kind of evidence and a truth, if you like, which sits there for independent inquiry. From the point of view of the Athens idea, well, this is one of the best human that ever lived, the person that lived the best ever life, but he died as well, and he was put in a tomb and nothing happened after that. It was a nice story, but it had a pretty standard ending. Or maybe that idea from Jerusalem that this was the one, this was the long promised Messiah that God had said he would send, and that this resurrection really did happen. We can look into that for ourselves. And it's evidence of this future being the one that we can participate in, being the one which is evidence of God saying, no, this is not the end of the story. This suffering will have a sell-by limit on it. You can join me in creating this better world, this kingdom of God, as I've referred to it as, and we can all make that choice as we stand on the platform. Those two different concepts of the future are kind of both vying for our attention. And I think that the best place to settle, the one that we go for, would be that historical inquiry, which stands objectively.
Thank you, Andy. These last two questions, one for Darren and one for Andy. So Darren, how are you reimagining 2021? What does that look like for you personally and professionally?
Yeah, I mean, I think if this year has taught me anything, it's really just to take things one week at a time. Where it's a very uncertain time right now, and as much as we crave certainty as humans, I think it's important to also, remain flexible and adaptable to circumstances which are changing quite rapidly. And so, both at work and in my personal life, we've really just tried to focus on the short term and what are we going to do this week and what might we do this month. And that's helped us stay grounded, but also not get too distracted or hopeful or discouraged by what may change and affect our plans going forward. And I think this year has really forced us to reevaluate, a lot of legacy that may not be applicable anymore. And so at work, there, I think was a pretty common belief that when everyone is in the same room to have a meeting, that was a very effective meeting, and people would travel to do so. And I think this year many of us are learning that there are alternate ways to be effective. And so what I'm trying to do is look at what have we learned this year, kind of by force in this situation that we can actually take forward. And so that if there is a vaccine, I expect the world to be changed forever. But I also expect a lot of the things that we've been kind of forced into this year will persist, and probably for the benefit of many. And so both personally and at work, just trying to look for those opportunities and the things that can make our lives better and give us more time with family and more time to focus on ourselves and to rest and to really be more effective that way.
Thank you, Darren. And you're right, the world has changed. The world has changed. So, Andy, taking into consideration that the world has changed, where do we go from here?
Yeah. Well, if the world's changed, Alana, then I guess the things that we might have used to kind of maneuver away around it have also they don't work anymore. We don't have a map. We don't have some of these things that give us a sense of security. And I guess this whole series is centered around a bunch of questions, and we've loved this conversation about working together towards answers. But actually, one of the things which is most certain above all is the fact that the world that we're going to be stepping into is full of uncertainty. That is the one thing that we can be certain of. And how that sits with us is going to make all the difference. We can say that we don't know what's going to happen, and either that's okay somehow, and I'm going to say a couple of comments about how I think we can live in that place, or actually that uncertainty and the fear that it generates and the striving that it causes us to have will actually just lead us on a path of something which doesn't take us to a place where we're going to thrive. So what would it look like to step out into that if that is kind of the terrain that we're moving into? Well, it would probably be to dispense with the things that we really want, that idea of control and that map, and the journey being one which we have a kind of full sense of confidence about, and to take seriously the claim that what might be far better in a situation like this is actually a guide of some description, and that really unique offering, I think, at the heart of the Christian faith, of that relationship with God who comes alongside us. Actually, the Bible gives the language of a shepherd willing to walk through dark valleys and places of deep fear with us. But if we can just keep in step with him, he'll bring us to green pastures and some still waters as well. And Christmas and Thanksgiving, Christmas just around the corner. And I feel like in the darkness of everything that we've experienced, what we're looking for is a light to follow. And I've just been reminded of that scripture that we've read at carol services, if we tend to go to carol services at this time of year, of the people walking in darkness, seeing a great light, of Christmas all being about a child being born, a son being given to us, and the name of that son being a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, a Prince of Peace. What might it mean to walk and do this with him? Of course, on this call, we are leaders, managers, people with heavy responsibilities. We've got to do scenario planning. We've got to manage risk. We've got to negotiate our leases to get out of whatever our arrangements with landlords are, since I'm not going to work from home. We've got all of that to deal with, but actually just in the quietness of our own hearts, when we do get home and we consider how are we going to deal with this uncertainty at the level of a soul. One of the ways that the Bible describes it is a bit like Jesus being at the door of our lives and knocking. And if any of us open the door, he's going to come in and eat with us. He's in the business of bringing light into dark places. He's in the business of bringing transformation where we don't even think that is possible. And so just to tie things up, this theme of reimagination has been about wanting to open ourselves up to that idea of God maybe saying something really significant to us through the lens of all of these questions that we are dealing with. And it may be that people on the call have journeyed with us over this whole series. And if you are feeling like there has been a growing sense, then I just want to encourage you to continue on with that thing that might be happening in your life. You might feel that you want to respond to God for the first time, but I encourage you to do that. Or even just the sense that, hey, there might be something about this Jesus that I never thought actually was credible before, and how that is a great thing to keep considering as well. And he might be the one that can make the difference as we step out into this uncertain future.
Well, thank you, Andy, and thank you, Darren. Our time has come to an end. This has been a robust conversation about reimagining 2021 from start to finish. For those who are interested in viewing this session again or any of the other 7 sessions, you can simply go to either one of our websites at www.rzim.ca or www.intricity.ca. We invite you to consider our spring series, where we will be looking at rethinking technology. And it starts April 7th, goes to May 19th, and it will be a bi-weekly panel with RZIM, Faith Tech, and Intricity. We know that you might still have questions, and that's natural, necessary, and normal. And so RZIM would invite you to connect in with them and continue to ask questions. And as Andy alluded to about this babe in the manger, our organization Intricity invites you to the 20th anniversary of Ringing the Bells next Wednesday, December 2nd from 7:30 to 8:30. So thank you for journeying with us. We wish you the hope, peace, love, and joy of the Advent season. Thank you for joining us.